Your latest book is Surrender, and I want to talk about what this book means to you, a little bit about passive and active surrender, and how is this surrender victory for those who are willing to surrender to the avatar, the divine within, the truth, the only reality.
Yeah, it's a big question, right? So, the book is Surrender with Meher Baba. And I put with Meher Baba because without Meher Baba, I'm not sure how much I'm going to get done. I need his help. I need his guidance. I know that much. So Surrender with Meher Baba means to me that, the way the ego works, according to Baba, right, how this all works with the ego is the ego has desires, and the ego and the mind and the desires are in cahoots. And it's like most people in the world are not living a spiritual life. They're living the ego life of trying to constantly fulfill their desires. And it becomes about I, me, my, and mine. And it's always, how do I get what I want? Wants and desires. And so the opposite of the ego-driven life, where it's always about what do I want and how do I get my desires fulfilled, is what we've seen modeled by spiritual masters such as Jesus, the avatar Jesus, and many other masters throughout time, Meher Baba, where he says, instead of going after what you want, try to align yourself with the divine will. And that becomes a giant undertaking, a journey of surrendering self-will and the I want and the I desire for, wait a second, I don't trust what I want. What does Baba want in this situation? That requires discipline of slowing down the mind, realizing the voice of the ego, realizing the voice of desires, and not giving that voice or that energy the keys to the car. Don't let that be the driver. And when instead Baba's the driver, or you're driving with Baba, and it's a mindfulness and a surrender and a discipline to say, wait, Baba, what do you want right now? How can I please you? How can I be of service to you in this situation? That defangs and declaws the ego and its desires, and now it's the heart and intuition and inspiration and the guidance of Meher Baba that is calling the shots. And Baba has said many things about this, right? He said, remember me and I am with you and my love will guide you. And I put it in the book also here, Mani, Baba's sister. It's a great story in the book. She wrote a little bit that I saw. It's a long story, but I saw this little bit of what she wrote that said, Baba told us, you either want what I want or you want what you want. You can't want both. It's in the book, the whole story, but Baba, this the line from Mani, Baba's sister. Baba told us, you either want what you want or you want what I want. You can't want both. Now, for me, that the reason I put that in the book, of course, is because that, for me, sums up surrender. If you go through life wanting what you want and organizing your life to get what you want, that's not spirituality and it's not surrender. If you go through your life realizing that the ego is always going to be trying to perpetuate itself, and instead say, hang on now, Baba, what do you want here? And making that effort to align with Baba within, the divine, the avatar within, that becomes, it may seem small, but it becomes a step, and one step leads to another. And Baba says the entire spiritual path is nothing but a series of surrender, culminating in the final surrender, which is the surrender of the separate self, the separate I, which is the false, limited I, which thinks of itself and experiences itself as separate from other individuals and separate from God. And when you can surrender that final sense of separation, Baba says, that's the last surrender, and it results in God realization. And I'm reminded of the incredible story of Majnun and Layla, where Majnun was in love with Layla, but she had been married to another person, and he knew he could never have her, but he thought of her only. And he would actually wander and repeat her name, Layla, Layla. And he had lost his care for himself. He had lost his sense of self. He had lost his desire for himself and his wanting. And all he thought about was Layla and her happiness. To the point, Baba said, when he walked in front of a spiritual master, and the master said, if you had that, longing and depths of feeling for God as you have for Layla, you'd be self-realized. You'd be one with God. And Majnun looked at the master and said, but I'm not interested in God. I'm interested in Layla. And the master gave him God realization anyway. He wasn't even looking for it. It's like that. It's like that's the surrender has to do with moving beyond the ages and ages of ego work, ego striving. The ego's always trying to get everything organized so it can be happy, but it's not happy. And so it's the path away from the ego towards God, which is the path of surrender. And Bob has said it in so many different ways, but he said also, especially in the West, when he was first in contact with the West in the 30s, and the Western disciples would say, what is this spirituality that you're trying to explain to us, Baba? And Baba would say, it's so simple. He said, for lifetime after lifetime, it's your ego that's making all your decisions. You're just driven by your ego. So spirituality is the opposite of that. It's not doing what you have been doing for lifetimes, not following the dictates of your ego, not seeking your own happiness, not seeking to satisfy your desires. Try to make other people happy. It's not complicated, but it's extremely difficult because the ego is entrenched. It's deeply rooted. It's like pulling a molar. It's like a root canal. It's not a simple process to extract.
Yeah, like how many people want to hear make others happy even at the cost of your own happiness, right?
That's exactly right. And so, and I get into that in the book, right? So if I could read one thing I think that is really interesting.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, I have a section in the back here where I walk people through some exercises, because I think many, if not all, I'm one of them, need help with this, right? It's not something that we learn in school. It's certainly not something that my parents modeled for me. They never explained about spirituality or surrender. My God, I grew up. I used to have a bumper sticker on the back of my car. It said, "You have to forgive me. I was raised by wolves." I grew up in a very chaotic and emotionally difficult environment. Not physically so much, but emotionally. And so this was something I had to really learn from Baba, not from anybody else around me. But Don helped. Don was my mentor also, Don Stevens. But we can talk more about Don in a bit.
Yeah.
This is one of the exercises in the back of Surrender with Meher Baba on page 118. It says, Exercise 2. Meher Baba stated, complete surrenderance to the God-man is not possible for one and all. When this is not possible, the other high roads which can eventually win the grace of God are 1. Loving obedience to and remembrance of the God-man to the best of one's ability. And the God-man here means the avatar, the Christ, the prophet.
Yeah.
2. Yeah, so pick your God-man is basically what that comes down to, right? 2.
Mm-hmm.
Love for God and intense longing to see him and be united with him. 3. being in constant company with the saints and lovers of God and rendering them wholehearted service. That's one I picked up and really tried to practice. 4, avoiding lust, greed, anger, hatred, and the temptations of power, fame, and fault finding. 5, leaving everyone and everything in complete external renunciation and in solitude, devoting oneself to fasting, prayer, and meditation. I definitely haven't done that. 6, carrying on all worldly duties with a pure heart and a clean mind and with equal acceptance of success or failure while remaining detached in the midst of intense activity. And 7, selfless service to humanity without thought of gain or reward. Now, I call this out in the book, but this is an extraordinary quote from Baba, because here he's saying at the very beginning that it's not even possible for everybody to surrender to the God-man. He said complete surrenderance to the God-man is not possible for one and all. What that means to me is he's saying, look, we got 8 billion people on planet Earth. They're not all at the same place spiritually where they're just ready to suddenly surrender. They're just not there. And yet, he's got the compassion to give 7 other ways to approach God to win the grace of God. So it's like, how can you be more compassionate if you're the avatar, if you're God in human form, than to say, I know that you're not all able to surrender. That's okay. Just, do something. And he gives you 7 other ways to make some progress. It's so beautiful to me.
I love it. And I'm thinking about Don Stevens, too, in another interview I saw with you. The interviewer asked you, about Baba telling Don to go to his oil man job, and it's like, and it's like, why? We don't always understand the ways of the avatar, but I thought about that for a little while, and it's like we need people in those positions. I mean, he knows where everybody needs to be. And also, I think about, too, with all of our circumstances, they are, as Baba puts it, as I understand it, it's our karma. And
That's right.
So it's best to just go directly into your karma and start working with it instead of try to avoid it all and go up to a mountaintop. I'm thinking about the one story, and I wish I could remember all the minute details, but about the man who came to Baba and offered up his wife and kids, right? And Baba just kind of laughs and is like, you're not going to get off that easy, right?
There's lots of stories like that in the spiritual history. Yeah, people thinking they can just jump out of their life, and it doesn't usually work out that way.
Right, and also the fact that Baba talks about, I am you. So going back to the part about what Monty said, about you can either have it my way or your way, you can't have both, is so brilliant and clever and perfect. And because he's saying, I am your way. I am the highest of the high. I am the highest you possible. And once you have it, I find a lot of people who I've encountered that are dedicated to Baba have had a direct experience with this. Before Baba came into, before I had a face, before I had a master, before I had a personification of God for me to surrender to, I was raised in an agnostic family. And I was just laying in bed one night. I didn't have a dad around, so I think maybe I was turning to God the Father, and I think God can show up as a mother, and He's in all of us. But I started to have this direct revelation of God, and it took me about a year because to realize that's what was happening, because I was a smart kid. I was really into role-playing games and things when I was a kid, and creating these worlds, and escapism was already kind of coming at me at that point. I didn't even realize it. I kind of wanted out of the madness, and God starts showing up for me. And then through a series of therapists and things, I enter into one therapist's office, and he has a picture of Meher Baba. And I asked, who is that? And he said, that's Meher Baba. And just told me a little bit about him. Didn't go real deep, but his name was Philip White, and a great Baba lover, and he's the only other one I know here in Tulsa where I live. And so we continued on with our therapy, and that image kept popping into my head, and strangely, he told me about Mara and Baba's love, and just how, I forget the words that he used, but just about how it's like one of the greatest loves people had ever seen, and it just blew people's minds. And for some reason, I always pictured her, I must have looked her up or something, but I pictured her standing behind Baba in this photo that I saw, and became fully convinced that she was in that photo. And then Baba continually popping into my mind over a period of about 10 years, and it literally just became so prevalent in my day-to-day life that I just finally was like, okay, I got to find out more about this guy. And I ended up buying The Awakener by Charles Haynes, which I think is a great primer for Baba. It kind of covers a gamut there. And that's when I started to fall in love. And Baba just describes this too, about how we kind of move in and out with him. And there's so many times of uncertainty that I have about him, and then sure enough, that uncertainty gets burned away and my life improves once again, and I reignite my love for Baba, and the fire just keeps getting greater and greater and consuming more and more of everything I'm willing to surrender. But I love Baba, and just internally he keeps telling me, just like, okay, Ben, have it your way. I know what's best for you. I know what's best for you by now. And I know you're gonna try it your way again and again and again. And I'm gonna keep hurting myself, and then eventually I'm gonna realize that what he says about I am you is absolutely true. And I want to ask you about provisional ego. Kind of came to mind too. Because I heard a story in a book by Tara Brach I read, Radical Acceptance, about the Buddha, and how even after enlightenment, Mara, as Buddha called it, which I understand.
I know Mara.
Yeah, you know Mara. Okay, so Mara would show up, right? And so, and he would recognize his ego coming back, and I love that, because Baba talks about, does he say destroy the ego, annihilate the ego, I think is what Baba says. But to me, that seems like more ego. And do we need a provisional ego?
Right. So it has to do with, all the things you're saying have to do with this strange experience of not being asleep, which is the Sufi way of talking about the people who are purely ego-driven and they have no inkling of spirituality.
They're asleep.
And the Sufis call them sleeping, and not being self-realized, but we're in the in-between state. So the space in between is being spiritually aware but not being self-realized, which is excruciating, because we can't go back to sleep, and we're not fully enlightened or realized. And so the provisional ego, it's connected to what you also asked about, which is the difference between passive and active surrender. So the provisional ego is what you use in active surrender. So let's talk about the difference between passive and active surrender. The way this whole work on surrender started for me was I had been doing quite a bit of work on forgiveness and offering seminars on forgiveness all over the world. And so we were at a discourses meeting at the Meher Spiritual Center, and surrender came up in the meeting. It wasn't a meeting on surrender, but it came up in the discourse. And one of the participants who I knew, she threw up her hands and she said something like, I give up. I just surrender. And it was this kind of exasperated, exhausted, kind of little bitter uh, expression, and kind of dramatic and calling attention to herself and all this kind of stuff. And I just kind of looked at her, and I'd known her for decades, and I said, I'm not sure that's the kind of surrender Bob was talking about, you know. And she said, what do you mean? She was very kind of edgy. I said, I think he's talking about active surrender, not that I give up kind of surrender. But it was in the middle of a discourses meeting, so I said, maybe we should talk about this another time, you know. So we finished the discourses meeting, and she didn't want to let it go, so she came over and she said, I want to hear more about this active surrender, and can you put together a workshop on surrender? So I said, yeah, okay, sure. So this book came out of that work on the original seminar on surrender, which I put together for her and the group, and it got refined a couple of times. We did it more than once, and then I thought, well, I'm ready to write about this. Let's just go for it. And so the provisional ego is the active spiritual effort to say, not I am doing this, but Baba is doing this through me. You know, this is the step before becoming Baba. You have to play these sort of roles. It's almost like a game now with Baba. We know we're not the ego. We know we're really one with Baba, but we know it intellectually. So how do we get to experience it? How do we have the state that Baba and Christ and Buddha had, the state of Krishna, the state of the prophet, right? How do we have that experience? Well, it's not just going to dawn, because it comes through his grace, and we need to make an effort. And the efforts we make, one of the efforts we make, is the provisional ego. It's, Baba through me is providing for my family. He's giving me this beautiful job, a beautiful boss, great clients. Through me, he's using this form, this situation, to provide for the family. If I go around saying, hey, look at me, I'm great, this is I'm important, this is what I've done, this is what I'm doing, and it becomes about boosting my ego. Baba says that's the opposite of what is the spiritual path. If I remain in humility and I say, everything is happening so that Baba can wake me up to who I really am. All my success, all my failure, the results belong to him. He's doing everything through everybody all the time. And you kind of mentioned this also about him being within everyone. All of this blends together. But the gist of it is, my active surrender is part of the provisional ego. It's Baba, it's Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. It's Baba, not my will should be done, but as you wish. Please inform me, Baba. Tell me, what do you want in this situation, so that I can manifest your will on earth as it is in heaven. That's what I put in the book, right? That whole story of the Lord's Prayer, where we say on earth as it is in heaven, where we see Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane saying, not my will, Father, but as you wish, even if it means crucifixion. All these stories are so beautiful, but they're not meant to be stories. They're meant to be living examples of how we should behave spiritually. So the provisional ego, active surrender, all of it is just a symbol of pointing to how do we put our head at Baba's feet and leave it there. I don't know if you know that story, but that's a great story. And it's about, when he says, hold on, you asked about hold on to my Dhamman until the very end, right? In the prayer that we say, yeah. Beloved God, help us all to love you more and more and more and more and still yet more, till we become worthy of union with you. That's the setup. And help us all to hold fast to Baba's Dhamman. That's the Dhamman, the edge of his garment, right? Hold fast to Baba's Dhamman until the very end. Well, when you're holding fast to his Dhamman, that's your provisional ego doing active surrender by saying, I'm making an effort, Baba, to hold on to you. And if I'm holding on to your Dhamma, if I'm truly holding on to your Dhamma, guess what? Guess what my hands can't do? Other things. So this it's symbolic, right? The hands are the doing. Of course, the feet are too. But when you're holding on to Baba's Dhamma, you're actively surrendering. And guess what? If you're holding on to him and he's going that way, your feet are going that way too. So by holding on to him, you're following him, you're obeying him, you're surrendering to him. Your provisional ego is saying, I'd rather go where you want to go, Baba, than have my ego driving me to, the strip club, or to, buy some pot, or to, the MMA fight at the bar tonight, or whatever. It's where you want me tonight, Baba. Do you want me to sit with Ben and talk about you? That's what I want to do too. Let's do it.
Right on.